Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa, and this is going to be a review of Sipping Dom Perignon Through a Straw by Eddie Ndopu. Eddie might be in his 30s now, early 30s. This book came out in 2023, and it is about his time, especially during the year of his master's degree that he got in Oxford in the UK. He is a South African black man with spinal muscular atrophy. He's also gay. He uses an electric wheelchair, and a lot of what the book is about is him fighting for accessibility for himself while at Oxford. It also has flashbacks, usually fairly short, to other times in his life and how they kind of apply to his life during this year, and then a little bit at the end about his life after that master's degree. On the front of the book, you can see an illustration of him, and then on the back of the book is a photo. There's also a set of photos kind of in the middle of the book, some of which were taken to celebrate certain moments or to raise funds, as he had to do that a few times to be able to get this degree, and some are just him having fun with friends. I found that the first chapter or two were a little bit slow, but after that the pace picked up and I was able to finish it pretty quickly. Also, in the book, Eddie mentions some time he spent with Alec Vaid-Menon and them being friends, and I recognized that name and realized that Alec Vaid-Menon is actually the author of this book that I reviewed earlier this year, Beyond the Gender Binary, from the Penguin Pocketbook Collective. The subtitle of the book is Reimagining Success as a Disabled Achiever, which was definitely part of the focus, but like I said, a lot of the focus was on his fight for accessibility at Oxford. So first, the university gave him a scholarship for the tuition and a little bit for living expenses, but just the same as any other student, when obviously his living expenses are much higher because he has to have a basically round-the-clock caregiver, someone to transfer him from his wheelchair to the bed, to the toilet, all these sorts of things, as well as someone needs to help him eat because he can't move his hands very much, and also someone to turn him every 2 hours during the night, because most people might not be aware of this, but able-bodied people and a fair amount of disabled people who don't have heavy mobility issues move around at night naturally. Pretty much people do not just lay in one position, because if you do lay in one position, you will accumulate bed sores. You can also get bed sores while sitting in a wheelchair if the wheelchair does not have the right cushioning or if you're not transferred in and out of it enough. And so a lot of people with severe mobility issues get bed sores. And because he was able to find great caregivers all his life, for the first 16 years, I believe it was his mom, he did not suffer from these issues. But that was always a big danger. It goes, and the book describes not just his fight for the money to pay for accommodations and the caregiving, but also the struggle to get caregivers who were half decent at all. He worked with one agency that was willing to find someone who could go internationally to pick him up and be with him through the airplane ride from South Africa. He labels them as numbers, mostly because they were with him for such a short time that there's no reason in the narrative to be calling them by their names, and also, of course, to protect their anonymity, but also because vast majority of them were pretty terrible. So in the US and in South Africa, and I assume any other places where people understand things, CNAs, which is a pretty basic qualification you get to be to do things in a care setting, like a lot of the people that you encounter in a hospital that you think are nurses are actually CNAs, commonly called nurses' aides, or MAs, medical assistants. And I don't know if medical assistants are trained in this, but CNAs are trained to transfer people by hand, because that's way more logical and dignity preserving and just efficient than getting a Hoyer lift or hoist every time you need to transfer someone. In the UK, apparently, the type of caregiving company that he was able to get a caregiver from, which seems to be the only type of caregiving there is, they were not allowed to transfer someone by hand, which if you use good body mechanics is really not dangerous. It can depend on the size of the person doing the lifting, but there can be a fair weight differential if you use good body mechanics. So that was the first big obstacle. Could not be transferred except with two people at the same time. Even then, they were really supposed to use a lift to do it. And most of them refused to do it without a lift, and he couldn't get a lift for the first month of being at Oxford. So that means he was transferred minimally, and I don't know how these caregivers didn't notice or care about the fact that he went for 22 days without having a bowel movement, because they wouldn't put him on the toilet. They would only transfer him from the bed to the chair. As someone who has done care for a woman who is paraplegic, I was incensed by these caregivers who knew that the only way he could get to a toilet was with them, with their help, and just let that go on and didn't start advocating for something, for the lift to get there sooner or for more help or something, when they, day after day, never helped him onto the toilet. I'm not sure how many years ago this was. Though it was published in 2023, it was written a few years after his master's was completed, but I really hope they've changed whatever regulation it was that said they can't move people without a Hoyer lift, because obviously sometimes the Hoyer lift isn't there. This is Samwise, by the way. And so Eddie really paved the way for future wheelchair users, particularly, but disabled people in general, to go to Oxford, because until then, although it is the law to provide reasonable accommodations, organizations in the UK, much like in the US, have to be forced to actually provide those accommodations. A lot of this book is about how Eddie forced his way through this master's degree and forced these people to give accommodations. So there was a lot in this book to be frustrated about on the author's behalf, but there was also a lot of beautiful joy and love. He, pretty soon after arriving, formed a squad of students who had been not necessarily very close with at his boarding school back in South Africa that was for brilliant young people from all over Africa. But now that they had that thing in common and were at this master's program together, they glommed onto each other and were wonderfully supportive. And I really love seeing the friendships he described. Like, I'm so happy that that's a real thing, because usually with a friendship group this strong, usually you see those types of things in fiction, but this is a non-fiction. And then, of course, it talks about his friendship with Alec Vaid-Menon and several other Black queer activists, the various people he's been able to meet throughout his career. He is basically a speaker and activist for disabled rights all over the world. I think he now works for part of the UN. It also talks about how, though he is a really great self-advocate and pushes really hard himself for the accommodations that he needs and things like that, sometimes he also needs help from other people, especially from people more privileged than he is, who are able to wield that privilege on his behalf. And yeah, there were just a lot of examples of solidarity in this book, and I really appreciated that. It's beautiful to see. It also talked about how this experience traumatized him. Reminded me a little bit of my own schooling trauma, which was different, but definitely brought up some of my feelings in that area. And I think the way he talked about that aspect of it was really well done as well. Overall, I'm really glad that I read this, so thank you to the Disability Readathon for having it as a group book and on your various recommendation lists, because I had not heard of this except from the Disability Readathon. And I gave it 5 stars. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to leave an emoji, how about something celebratory? Like those little confetti cannon things. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!